Marcus moved closer, his hand coming up to cup my cheek. "I never stopped thinking about you, Bella. All these years, all these cities. You were always there in the back of my mind." I should have pulled away. Instead, I leaned into his touch. "Marcus." When I walked into the Blue Note Jazz Club that October evening, I never expected my carefully constructed world to shift on its axis. But there he was, Marcus Chun, the brilliant jazz pianist I'd fallen for during my years at Juilliard, sitting at the gleaming Steinway like he'd never left. I'm Isabella Romano now, lead violinist for the New York Philharmonic. My husband James is a corporate lawyer at one of the city's top firms. We live in a brownstone on the Upper West Side with our daughter Sophia. It's the life I thought I wanted: prestigious, secure, picture-perfect. But seeing Marcus again awakened something I'd buried deep inside. The moment our eyes met across the dimly lit club, the years melted away. I was transported back to practice rooms and late-night jam sessions, to the raw passion of creating music together. His fingers stilled on the keys and a flash of recognition crossed his face. The air between us crackled with electricity. I shouldn't have stayed. I should have turned and walked right back out into the crisp autumn night. Instead, I found myself sliding onto the piano bench beside him after his set, our shoulders barely touching. "Bella," he said softly, using the nickname only he had ever called me. "You look exactly the same." The lie made me smile. At 35, fine lines had started appearing at the corners of my eyes. But in that moment I felt 22 again, young, wild, full of dreams. "You're still playing beautifully," I replied. "I heard you've been in Europe? Berlin, Paris, touring with different groups. Just got back to New York last month." His fingers ghosted over the keys, not quite playing. "And you?" "Still with the Philharmonic." We talked for hours, trading stories of the lives we'd lived in parallel. He told me about the experimental jazz fusion projects he'd been working on. I shared tales of performing at Carnegie Hall and teaching gifted young musicians. Neither of us mentioned the real reason we'd drifted apart: his burning need to push musical boundaries versus my desire for stability and tradition. When the club finally closed, we exchanged numbers almost hesitantly. "We should grab coffee sometime," Marcus said. "Catch up properly." I nodded, already knowing it was dangerous territory, but I couldn't help myself. The next few weeks passed in a blur of texts and chance meetings. Coffee turned into lunch, turned into drinks after his shows. Each time I saw him, I felt more alive, more myself. Marcus had always brought out the adventurous side of me, the part that wasn't afraid to improvise and take risks. James noticed the change in me but attributed it to a new piece I was working on. "You seem energized lately," he commented one morning over breakfast. "It's nice to see you so passionate about music again." The guilt twisted in my stomach, because while I was falling in love with performing again, I was also falling back in love with Marcus. It came to a head one rainy November evening. I had told James the first was meeting with my quartet to rehearse, but instead found myself at Marcus's loft in Brooklyn. The space was exactly what you'd expect from him: exposed brick walls covered in vintage jazz posters, a restored upright piano in one corner, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. "Play something with me," he said, gesturing to the violin case I'd brought. For old time's sake. We started with standards, Gershwin, Porter, pieces we both knew by heart. But soon we were improvising, creating something new together. The music flowed between us like electricity. When we finally stopped playing, we were both breathing hard, caught up in the moment. Marcus moved closer, his hand coming up to cup my cheek. "I never stopped thinking about you, Bella. All these years, all these cities. You were always there in the back of my mind." I should have pulled away. Instead, I leaned into his touch. "Marcus." His kiss was exactly as I remembered: passionate, all-consuming, tasting faintly of coffee and mint. I melted into him, my fingers tangling in his hair as years of suppressed longing burst free. What followed was a whirlwind of stolen moments and secret meetings. We'd rendezvous at out-of-the-way cafes, hidden jazz clubs, his Brooklyn loft. Sometimes we'd play music together. Other times we'd just talk for hours. Every moment with Marcus felt like coming up for air after being underwater too long. He understood parts of me that James never could: the obsessive drive for perfection, the way music lived in my bones. When I played for Marcus, I didn't have to hold back or stick to the score. I could let the music take me where it wanted to go. but the guilt was eating me alive. James was a good man, a loving father. He'd supported my career, never complained about the long rehearsals or touring schedule. And Sophia, my beautiful 9-year-old who practiced piano diligently every morning, wanting to be just like her mom. The thought of hurting them was unbearable. Marcus sensed my internal struggle. One evening in early December, as we lay tangled together on his couch listening to Coltrane, he broached the subject we'd been avoiding. "Come away with me," he whispered. "I'm starting a new project in Paris next month. We could make music together again, really push boundaries. No more playing it safe." The offer was tempting, so tempting I could almost taste it. The thought of making experimental jazz in Paris, of being truly artistically free. It was everything I dreamed of in my youth. But I thought of Sophia's piano recital next week, of James's proud smile when I performed with the Philharmonic, of the life we'd built together. "I can't," I said softly. "You know I can't." Marcus sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair. The Bella I knew wouldn't have said that. She would have taken the risk. The Bella you knew was young and selfish. I have responsibilities now. Is that what we're calling it? Responsibilities. His voice held an edge I'd never heard before. Or are you just afraid? The words hit home harder than I wanted to admit. Was I afraid? Afraid of change, of taking risks, of following my heart? That night marked a turning point. I knew we couldn't continue in limbo forever. Something had to give. The decision was made for us a week later. James found text messages on my phone, nothing explicit, but enough to raise suspicions. When he confronted me, I couldn't lie anymore. The conversation that followed was one of the hardest of my life. James listened quietly as I confessed everything, meeting Marcus again, our affair, my struggles with feeling artistically stifled. When I finished, he was silent for a long time. "I always knew there was a part of you I couldn't reach," he finally said. "The part that comes alive when you're performing. I thought I could be enough, that our life together would be enough. But I see now that I was wrong. James, I'm so sorry," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "Are you in love with him?" The question hung in the air between us. "I love you," I said carefully. "You and Sophia are my world." "That's not what I asked." I couldn't answer. My silence said everything. The next few months were a blur of lawyers, custody arrangements, and well-meaning friends taking sides. I moved into a small apartment near Lincoln Center. Sophia split her time between homes, confused and angry at the sudden upheaval in her life. Marcus waited patiently, never pushing. When the divorce was finalized in spring, he asked me again about Paris. This time my answer surprised us both. "No," I said firmly. "I need to find my own way." I could see the hurt in his eyes, but also understanding. What we'd had was beautiful, passionate, transformative, but it belonged to a different time. I needed to discover who I was now, as a musician and a woman, without defining myself through anyone else's eyes. I took a sabbatical from the Philharmonic and started composing my own pieces. A blend of classical and jazz that felt uniquely mine. I taught Sophia to improvise on piano, watching her face light up as she discovered the joy of creating something new. Slowly, James and I learned to be friends again, united in our love for our daughter. Marcus left for Paris as planned. Sometimes I see his name in music magazines or hear his latest recordings. Each time, I feel a bittersweet pang of what might have been. But I don't regret our time together. He helped me remember who I was beneath the layers of responsibility and routine. Not just a wife and mother, but an artist with fire in her soul. Now, 2 years later, I'm preparing for my first solo concert at Carnegie Hall. The program includes several of my original compositions alongside classical pieces. It's terrifying and exhilarating, exactly how making music should feel. James will be there with Sophia, supporting me as always. And somewhere in the audience might be Marcus. He sent a cryptic text saying he's back in New York. The thought makes my heart skip, but no longer in the same way. We're different people now, shaped by the choices we've made. Life rarely gives us clear answers about love and art and the paths we choose. Sometimes the most beautiful melodies come from the dissonance, from the spaces between the notes. My affair with Marcus wasn't a simple story of right and wrong. It was a catalyst that forced me to confront the truth about myself and what I really wanted from life. I've learned that true passion isn't just about grand gestures and burning desires. It's about having the courage to be authentically yourself, even when it's difficult. It's about finding harmony between your dreams and your reality. As I step onto the Carnegie Hall stage tonight, violin in hand, I know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The music rises within me, not safe, not conventional, but wholly uniquely mine. And in the end, that's the greatest love story of all.